I need you to marry me tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp. She said it the way most people say good morning, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Liam Carter stopped sanding, looked up, and the woman standing in the doorway of his workshop's silk blouse, heels sinking into sawdust, jaw set like she'd already won, didn't flinch. Neither did he. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. She had driven 4 hours. That was the first thing Liam noticed. Not the car, not the clothes, not the way she stood, like the whole world was supposed to rearrange itself around her. It was the driving. 4 hours alone, no driver, no assistant riding shotgun with a tablet and a schedule. He could see the tension in her shoulders that comes from a long road and a decision that's already been made but still costs something. He'd seen that look before. On himself. In mirrors he tried to avoid. I need you to marry me tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp. He set the sandpaper down. Not slowly, not dramatically. Just set it down. Ma'am, he said, I think you might have the wrong address. Liam Carter, 34, widower. One daughter, Sophie, age 7. You own this workshop outright. No outstanding debt. No criminal record. No current romantic entanglements. She paused. I don't have the wrong address. He looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. Not the way men usually looked at Victoria Hale, which was either with want or with calculation, and usually both at once. He looked at her the way he looked at a piece of wood he wasn't sure about yet. Trying to find the grain. Trying to understand what it actually was before he decided what to do with it. How do you know all that? He asked. I had you researched. Before you drove 4 hours to propose to me. Before I drove 4 hours to make you an offer, she corrected. There's a difference. Is there? It wasn't a question. She heard that. My name is Victoria Hale, she said. I'm the CEO of... I know who you are. That stopped her, just for a half second, a flicker behind the eyes. The Hale Foundation, he said. Your grandmother started it. Southern Historical Preservation. My grandfather helped restore 3 properties under that program back in the 80s. I grew up knowing that name. Something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly. More like recalibration. Like she'd walked into a room expecting empty and found furniture already arranged. Then you understand what's at stake, she said. I understand what's at stake for you, he said. I don't yet understand what you think any of it has to do with me. She told him. Not the way she'd rehearsed it in the car, efficient clinical bullet points. The drive had worn that version down. What came out instead was something closer to the truth, and Victoria Hale was not accustomed to the truth arriving without her permission. Her grandmother Eleanor Hale had built the foundation over 40 years, $400 million in assets. Properties, collections, historical artifacts spanning 2 centuries of Southern American life. Not just money. Legacy. The kind of legacy that makes a name mean something beyond net worth. Eleanor had died 8 months ago. And Eleanor, God love her, had been a woman of her time in ways that had seemed charming when Victoria was a child and felt like a trap now that she was 30. The will had been ironclad and specific. Victoria would assume full control of the foundation on the condition that she be married legally, formally, publicly, within 1 year of Eleanor's passing. 8 months ago, Liam said. 8 months ago, Victoria confirmed. Which means you have 4 months left. Which means I have until tomorrow. He waited. My cousin, she said, and the word cousin came out like something she was trying not to bite through. Marcus Hale. He's been contesting the will since the day it was filed. He's also been very busy making sure that every potential arrangement I've explored over the last 8 months has fallen apart before it could be finalized. Arrangement, Liam repeated. I'm not going to pretend this is something it isn't, she said, and he respected that even if he didn't say so. I've approached 3 other men. All of them, within days, received visits from Marcus's lawyers. 2 of them were offered substantially more money to walk away. One of them, she stopped, pressed her lips together. One of them had a professional situation that suddenly became complicated in ways that required his full attention. Marcus had him threatened. Marcus had him handled. She said it the way you say a word that tastes bad. Marcus has a board hearing scheduled for next Monday. If I walk in there unmarried, he invokes the contested clause, and the foundation goes into a receivership committee that he controls. Within 6 months, the collection gets liquidated. The properties get sold. 40 years of my grandmother's work gets turned into cash and distributed to people who never set foot in a single one of those buildings. Liam was quiet for a moment. And you think coming to me, Marcus won't know? He doesn't know you exist, she said. That's the point. You're not in my world. You have no connections to my industry, my social circles, my board. You've never appeared in any context that would have put you on his radar. I've spent the last 3 weeks looking for someone who was completely invisible to Marcus's network. Invisible, he said. He didn't sound offended, just noting it. I mean that as a compliment. I know you do, he said. That's the interesting part. She didn't know what to do with that. Most people, when Victoria Hale spoke to them, worked very hard to give her what she wanted. This man just stood there, in his workshop, in his sawdust, looking at her like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided was worth solving yet. There's a legal contract, she said. Full terms. The arrangement would last a minimum of 14 months, long enough to satisfy the board, long enough to look credible under scrutiny. You would receive $2 million structured as you prefer. At the end of the period, an amicable and quiet dissolution. No complications. $2 million, he said. Yes. And you think I'm going to say yes? I think, she said carefully, that you're a man who's been building things alone for a long time. And I think $2 million buys Sophie's college and security and a lot of years where you don't have to worry about the roof. His jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough for her to know she'd landed somewhere real. Don't, he said. It was quiet. It was absolute. She blinked. Don't what? Don't use my daughter to close the deal. You can make your case on its own terms. But you bring Sophie into this again without my invitation, and we're done talking. The silence that followed was the loudest thing that had happened to Victoria Hale in a very long time. She expected him to ask her to leave. He didn't. He picked up the sandpaper, went back to work, and after a moment he said, "You want some water? It's hot." She did not know what to do with that either. She said yes. He pointed her toward a small fridge near the workbench. No assistant. No glass offered. Just pointed. She got her own water like a person and stood there holding the bottle and watching him work, and she had the disorienting sensation of not knowing what came next, which was not a sensation Victoria Hale had experienced in quite some time. "How did you find me specifically?" he asked. He wasn't looking at her. His hands kept moving. "Your grandfather's work with the foundation came up in the archive records. I went through everyone associated with those restorations. Family members, descendants, cross-referenced with current profiles. You came up as you have a small local reputation. People trust you. The hardware store owner on 5th has sent you 3 referrals this year. The elementary school uses your benches in their courtyard. The Methodist Church." He glanced up. She continued. "You don't talk much, but when you make a promise, you keep it. That's a harder thing to research than you'd think, and you passed every check I ran." He stopped working. "You researched my reputation," he said. "Character due diligence," she said. "I've been burned by people who looked good on paper. And I looked good on paper. You looked good in practice. That's different." He set the sandpaper down again, turned to face her fully. And she had the sense that she was now being evaluated in some way she didn't entirely have the framework for, not by her net worth or her title or the way she looked in a room, but by something older and more patient. "What happened to the man Marcus threatened?" Liam asked. "His architecture firm lost 2 major contracts inside a week. Is he okay? She blinked. She paused. He's rebuilding. I made sure he was compensated privately. Liam nodded slowly. You felt responsible. It was my fault he was in Marcus's crosshairs. That's not what I said. I said you felt responsible. Those aren't always the same thing. The fact that you know the difference matters. She stared at him. You're doing character due diligence on me. Seemed fair. Sophie appeared in the doorway between the workshop and the house at 12 minutes past 4, because Sophie operated on a schedule that had nothing to do with adult drama, and everything to do with the fact that school let out at 3:30, and the walk home took 17 minutes, and she always stopped at the corner to check on the neighbor's cat. She was 7 years old and had her father's eyes and a way of looking at the world that was far too direct for comfort. She looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at her. You're not a customer, Sophie said. No, Victoria agreed. You're dressed wrong for a customer. Customers come in work clothes or they come in church clothes because they don't know what a workshop is. You're dressed like you're going to a meeting. I was, Victoria said. I suppose I still am in a way. Sophie considered this. Then she looked at her father. Is she staying for dinner? We haven't decided that yet, Liam said. We're having pasta, Sophie informed Victoria, as though this were relevant data that might affect the negotiation. The kind with the little ears. Dad makes the sauce from scratch, but he always puts too much garlic. I keep telling him. I can hear you, Liam said. I know, Sophie said. Victoria Hale, who had navigated boardrooms and hostile shareholders, and a cousin who played chess with people's lives, stood in a sawdust-covered workshop, holding a water bottle, while a 7-year-old made a case about garlic, and felt for one unguarded moment something she couldn't name. It felt a little bit like home, which made no sense, which frightened her more than Marcus's lawyers ever had. They talked for 2 more hours. Not about contracts. Liam put those aside, literally handed the folder back to her and set it on a shelf, and they talked. About the foundation, about his grandfather, and what the restoration work had meant to the communities involved, about what Eleanor Hale had actually believed in, and whether those beliefs were visible in how Victoria ran things now, or whether they were just words in a mission statement on a website. Victoria answered carefully at first, then less carefully. She used to say the point wasn't preservation for preservation's sake, Victoria said. It wasn't about keeping things behind glass. It was about people knowing where they came from, knowing that the story was theirs, that it belonged to them. That's a good thing to believe, Liam said. I've spent 8 months trying to save the legal structure of it, she said. I'm not sure I've spent enough time thinking about whether I'm actually still living the part that matters. He looked at her. That's a brave thing to say. It surprised me too, she said. At 6:15, Sophie set the table for 3 without being asked. Liam watched his daughter do it 3 plates, 3 glasses, folded napkins that she'd learned to fold at school and was very proud of, and felt the specific weight of a man standing at the edge of something, and knowing that the ground on the other side might hold or might not, and knowing also that he was going to step anyway. Because $2 million wasn't why he was still talking. He was still talking because she'd said, I felt responsible. He was still talking because she'd flinched when he told her not to use Sophie to close the deal, and then instead of apologizing performatively, she'd just stopped, just redirected, just showed him she'd heard him. He was still talking because something in the way she'd described Eleanor Hale told him she'd loved her grandmother, not for the money, but for the woman. And a person who loved someone like that for who they were, not what they could do, was a person with a real center somewhere under all that precision. He wasn't naive. He knew what this was. But he also knew that Sophie had set 3 plates, and Sophie's instincts were better than his. Stay for dinner, he said. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't a negotiation. Just a fact he'd decided. Victoria looked at the table, at Sophie carefully straightening a fork, at Liam standing with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who'd already thought it through and arrived somewhere he trusted. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. and it was the most unguarded thing she'd said all afternoon. They ate pasta with too much garlic, and Sophie talked about the neighbor's cat, whose name was Gerald, and who had strong opinions about strangers. And Victoria listened. Actually listened, and asked questions that were real questions, not polite ones. And at some point during the second helping, she realized that no one in the room was performing anything, which meant she would have to stop too, which was the hardest thing she'd done in 8 months. After dinner, Sophie went to do homework. Liam cleaned up. Victoria stood at the sink with a dish towel drying because it felt wrong to just stand there, and they worked side by side for 5 minutes in a silence that was not uncomfortable. Then Liam said, "I have a condition." She kept drying. "Tell me, if this happens, if we do this, it's not a performance. You don't stay in a hotel and show up for the cameras. You live here. You eat dinner with us. You help with homework. You show up for the school pickup once in a while. You participate in whatever this is. Like it's real, because if Sophie is going to be anywhere near this arrangement, she gets the real version, or she gets nothing." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Marcus's people will be watching," she said. "If it doesn't look authentic—" "I'm not talking about Marcus's people," Liam said. "I'm talking about my daughter. She doesn't get a performance. She gets the truth, or she gets protected from the whole thing entirely. Your choice." Victoria set down the glass she'd been drying. "What if I don't know how?" she said, and it cost her something to say it. He could see that. "Nobody knows how," he said. "You just show up. That's all it is." She looked at him for a long moment. "If I agree to your conditions," she said, "and you agree to mine, we'd need to be at the courthouse by 7:45 tomorrow morning." "I know," he said. "That's—" She checked her watch. 13 hours from now." "I know," he said again. She took a breath. "Liam." "Victoria." "Why are you doing this?" "Not the money. Don't say the money. I'll know if you say the money." He was quiet for a beat. Then, "Because your grandmother built something real. And real things shouldn't get torn apart by people who only know how to take." She nodded, slowly, once. 7:45, she said. "I'll be there," he said. And he was already thinking about how to explain this to Sophie in a way that was honest and kind, and didn't ask more of her than she could give, which meant he was already treating this like something that mattered, something that required care, and not like a transaction, which might have been the moment. Right there over a clean glass and a damp dish towel 2 hours after the most unusual proposal either of them had ever been part of. The moment when it stopped being a deal, even if neither of them was ready to say that yet. Sophie appeared in the doorway one more time, before bed, in her pajamas, holding a library book about sea turtles. "Are you coming back?" she asked Victoria. Directly, the way only children ask. Victoria looked at Liam. He gave her nothing. This one was hers. "Yes," Victoria said. "I'm coming back." Sophie nodded like this was satisfactory information. Then she looked at her father. She put too much dish soap in the second glass. I could tell by the squeaking. "Good night, Sophie," Liam said. "Good night," Sophie said. And then to Victoria, "Gerald bites strangers, but he didn't bite you when you came in. He watched you from the window. That's actually a good sign." She disappeared back into the house. Victoria stood very still for a moment. Then she said, "She saw me come in from the window." "Sophie sees everything," Liam said. "You might as well know that now." Victoria picked up her keys, walked to the door, paused with her hand on the frame, the evening air coming in warm and thick with the smell of sawdust and gardenias from somewhere down the road. "I'll see you at 7:45, she said. "Don't be late," he said. "I'm never late." She almost smiled. It was the closest thing to one he'd seen from her all evening, and it looked like it surprised her as much as it surprised him. Then she was gone, her headlights cutting down the gravel drive, and Liam stood in the doorway of his workshop and listened to the sound of her car until it disappeared, and then to the crickets, and then to nothing. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow, everything changes. He went inside to make sure Sophie had brushed her teeth, because that was the truth of his life, that no matter what the world decided to drop on his doorstep, Sophie had to brush her teeth, and that was fine. That was the right order of things. He just had to remember to keep it that way. Even when everything else started to shift. He didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid Liam Carter had made hard decisions before, and fear wasn't what kept him awake. It was the weight of consequence. The specific, honest weight of a man who knows that what he does next will echo for longer than he can see. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling and thought about Sophie. Not about the money. Not about Victoria Hale or Marcus or the foundation. About his daughter asleep down the hall, who had set a third plate without being asked, and asked a stranger if she was coming back with the directness of someone who had already learned what it meant when people didn't. Sophie had been 4 when her mother died. Old enough to know something was gone. Young enough that the shape of it was still forming. Liam had spent 3 years trying to make sure that shape didn't become a wound she carried forever, that she learned the world had people in it who showed up, who stayed, who meant what they said. And now he was about to bring a woman into their home who had come to him with a contract. He sat up at 4:15 and went to the kitchen and made coffee he didn't really want. And he sat at the table where 3 hours ago they'd eaten pasta and talked about a cat named Gerald, and he thought, is this the right thing? He didn't know. But he knew that Victoria had flinched when he told her not to use Sophie to close the deal, and then she'd stopped. She hadn't defended herself. She hadn't pivoted. She'd just heard him. In Liam's experience, the people who heard you when it cost them something were the people worth trusting. He was still thinking about that when his phone lit up at 5:47. A text from a number he didn't have saved. He knew who it was. I couldn't sleep either. I'm sorry if this is too early. I wanted to say what you said last night about Eleanor, about real things. I've been sitting with it for hours. I think you understood her better from archive records than most people who knew her personally. That means something to me. See you at 7:45. V. He read it twice. Then he typed back, get some breakfast first. You're going to need it. L. 3 dots appeared. Then, is that carpenter's advice or general human advice? He almost smiled. Both. He got up, made real breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, the orange juice Sophie liked. And when Sophie padded into the kitchen at 6:30, hair still flattened on one side from sleep, she looked at the table, and then at her father, with that particular 7-year-old expression that meant she was running calculations. You made a lot of eggs, she said. I was hungry. You made enough for 3 people. He handed her a glass of orange juice. Eat your breakfast, Soph. She ate. Then between bites, with the casual precision she'd inherited from some ancestor Liam couldn't identify. Is she going to be here a lot now? Liam sat down across from her. Because this was the conversation. The one he hadn't fully scripted because there was no script for it, only honesty delivered carefully. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to listen all the way to the end before you ask questions. Can you do that? Sophie put down her fork, folded her hands, nodded once like a small board member. He told her the truth. Not every detail she was 7, but the essential shape of it. That Victoria needed help with something important. That he was going to help her. That Victoria would be staying with them for a while, and it was going to look different from normal life. But that nothing about their life, their real life, their rules, their dinners, their routines was going to change because of it. Sophie listened, all the way to the end, as promised. Then she said, Does she know about Mom's chair? Liam's chest tightened. Not yet. You should tell her, Sophie said, before she sits in it. Okay, he said quietly. And tell her Gerald only bites people who are nervous. If she's calm, she'll be fine. I will. Sophie picked up her fork again. She seemed okay, she said. Like that was the verdict, like that settled it. She listened when I talked about Gerald. Most grown-ups do the face. What face? The face where they're waiting for me to stop so they can talk to another grown-up. Sophie demonstrated it briefly, a fixed smile, slightly upward tilted glazed through the eyes. She didn't do the face. She actually asked me if Gerald was a tabby or a domestic shorthair. That's a real question. Liam looked at his daughter and felt the particular love that has no name, the one that lives somewhere between pride and terror and gratitude so large it has no edges. "You're something else, you know that," he said. "Yes," said Sophie, and went back to her eggs. Yeah, he was at the courthouse at 7:38. 7 minutes early because he was never late, and because some habits are the architecture of a man, and you don't pull them out even when everything else is shifting. Victoria was already there. She was standing outside on the steps, not pacing, not checking her phone, not performing calm, just standing, still, like she'd made peace with something in the night and arrived on the other side of it. She was wearing a deep navy dress, simple, nothing that announced itself. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like a woman who had made a considered choice and was prepared to live with it. She looked, Liam thought, like someone who was showing up for real. "You're early," she said when she saw him. "So are you." "I've been here since 7:15. She paused. "I didn't want to be late." "You said that like it means something else." She looked at him steadily. "It means I didn't want you to think I was the kind of person who makes agreements and doesn't keep them." He nodded once, accepted it. "Sophie says to tell you Gerald only bites nervous people. If you're calm, you'll be fine." Something crossed her face. Not a smile exactly. More like a window opening somewhere. "She said that this morning." "She also said you didn't do the face." "What face?" "I'll explain later." He moved toward the door. "We should go in. We've got a license window at 7:53. She fell into step beside him. And then quietly, almost to herself, "I've closed 8-figure deals. I've testified before a state senate committee. I've fired people I liked and hired people I didn't trust, and sat through 47 board meetings in the last calendar year." She paused. "I am more nervous right now than I have been for any of it." He held the door open. "That's because this one's real," he said. She walked through. The clerk at the window was a woman named Dottie, who had been working the marriage license desk for 19 years and had seen everything, and she looked at Victoria Hale and Liam Carter with the specific expression of someone who recognizes a story but knows better than to ask about it. "ID and documentation," Dottie said. They slid the paperwork across. Dottie reviewed it. Her eyebrows moved slightly on the Hale, just slightly, and then she composed herself back into professional neutrality. "There'll be a 48-hour," she began. "We have the expedited approval," Victoria said. She slid a second document across. "Medical urgency provision signed by Judge Harlan Bridges. It's dated yesterday." Dottie looked at the document, looked at Victoria, looked at Liam, who gave her nothing because he'd only learned about the expedited approval 20 minutes ago via a text message and was still processing it. "Bridges signed this himself," Dottie said. "He did," Victoria said. "He's known my family for 30 years. I called him at 11 p.m. "That's thorough," Dottie said. "I'm a thorough person," Victoria said, then softer. "And I'm out of time." Dottie held her gaze for a moment. Then she stamped the form. "Judge Calloway is in courtroom B. He performs civil ceremonies at 8 and 10. You can catch the 8 if you move." "Thank you," Liam said. Dottie looked at him, then back at Victoria. "Honey." She said, not to Victoria, to both of them somehow. "I hope whatever this is, it works out." Neither of them answered, which was probably the most honest response available. They had 6 minutes before 8 o'clock. They stood outside courtroom B in a hallway that smelled like old wood and floor wax, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, and Liam became aware suddenly and completely that he was about to get married. That sentence existed in his head with a weight he hadn't fully anticipated. He'd been married before. He knew what it meant. He knew what it cost. He knew what it was like to stand next to someone and make a promise and mean it down to the marrow. And he knew what it was like to have that person gone. This was not that. He knew it wasn't that. But the word still landed somewhere real. "Hey," Victoria said. He looked at her. "I know what you're thinking," she said. Or I think I know. And I want you to know I'm not. I don't take this lightly. What this word means. She stopped. Tried again. My grandmother was married for 51 years, to a man who drove her crazy and made her laugh and built her bookshelves on weekends. I grew up thinking that was what this was supposed to be. Her jaw shifted. I'm not pretending this is that, but I'm not treating it as nothing. Liam was quiet for a moment. Her name was Claire, he said. My wife. She would have found the whole situation completely absurd. A pause. She also would have liked you. She had no patience for people who wasted time, and you are definitively not a person who wastes time. Victoria looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize, like she'd been given something she hadn't asked for and didn't know where to put it. What was she like? She asked, quietly. She was a force, he said. She could not be talked out of anything she'd decided. Sophie has it too. He exhaled. I want you to know, bringing you into our home, letting Sophie know you, that's not something I take lightly either. She comes first. Always. In everything. I know, Victoria said. I need you to not just know it, he said. I need you to believe it. She met his eyes. I believe it, she said. And it wasn't a boardroom answer. It was the other kind. The bailiff opened the door to courtroom B. Carter and Hale, he said. That's us, Liam said, and they walked in. Judge Calloway was 63 years old and had the demeanor of a man who had seen every variety of human decision and arrived at a place of profound non-judgment about all of it. He performed their ceremony in 11 minutes, which was efficient and not unkind, and there was a moment during the do you take where he looked up from his paper and looked at both of them. Really looked in the way that experienced people sometimes do when they're trying to determine whether the people in front of them know what they're doing. Whatever he saw, he seemed to decide it was sufficient. I do, said Victoria. I do, said Liam. The ring was a simple gold band Victoria had brought too in a small velvet pouch, and she'd handed one to Liam without ceremony in the hallway, and he'd put it in his pocket without ceremony, and now they exchanged them with a steadiness that surprised them both. By the authority vested in me by the state of Georgia, Judge Calloway said, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Liam looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Liam. The judge cleared his throat very slightly. You may, if you'd like, mark the occasion, he said with the diplomatic phrasing of a man who had learned not to assume. Liam reached out and briefly gently took Victoria's hand. Just that. Just for a moment. Just to say I'm here. This is real. We did this together. She didn't pull away. She held on for exactly as long as it meant something. Then they both let go. The photographers were outside. 3 of them, which meant Marcus's people had found out, which meant they had less time than Victoria had hoped before the narrative started spinning in directions she couldn't control. Don't stop, she said quietly as they came through the door. Don't answer. Don't react. I know how to not react, Liam said. I know you do, she said. I was reminding myself. They walked through it. Cameras clicking, someone shouting Victoria's name, someone shouting something about the foundation. Liam kept his hand at the small of her back, not possessive, not performative, just present, and Victoria kept her chin up and her pace steady, and they reached his truck in 40 seconds and got in. The truck doors closed. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Victoria's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her face went very still. Marcus, she said. Liam watched her. She answered it. Put it on speaker, a decision that surprised him, a decision that said, I'm not hiding this from you. Congratulations, Marcus Hale said. His voice was smooth and very cold, the kind of cold that has been carefully maintained over a long time. You found someone. I did, Victoria said. A carpenter, Marcus said. And the way he said it like a word for something small made Liam's jaw tighten. Really, Victoria? I expected better theater. This isn't theater, Marcus. Of course it is. The question is whether the board believes it. A pause. I'll be reviewing the circumstances of this very sudden marriage very carefully. I have people who are thorough. So do I, Victoria said. We'll see, Marcus said. We'll see what 14 months of scrutiny turns up about your carpenter and his life, and his choices, and his very convenient timing. The smile was audible. Give my regards to your new husband. He hung up. The silence in the truck was very loud. Then Liam said, He's going to go after Sophie. Victoria turned to look at him. What? Not directly, not like that. But if he digs into my life and he finds out about Sophie, about how much I protect her, how much she means, he'll use her. Not to threaten, to destabilize, to introduce doubt about my judgment, my motivations, to make the story about whether a widowed carpenter with a young daughter is really in love with a billionaire or just trying to secure his kid's future. He paused. Is he capable of that? Victoria didn't answer immediately. Which was its own answer. Yes, she finally said. Then we need to be ready, he said. Not with a strategy, with the truth. Whatever they throw at us, the truth is the only version we can sustain for 14 months without it falling apart. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You've been thinking about this since last night. I've been thinking about Sophie since last night, he said. The rest of it follows. She nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Truth. We can work with that. It's not a strategy, he said again. I know, she said, and she almost sounded like she believed it. He started the truck. We need to pick up Sophie from school at 3:15, he said. She knows you're going to be around. She doesn't know the full weight of it yet. I want to manage that carefully. What do I do when I see her? He pulled out of the parking lot. Same thing you did last night, he said. Show up. Listen. Don't do the face. The face, she said. Sophie will explain. Victoria looked out the window. The city moving past. The rest of her life beginning in a pickup truck that smelled like sawdust and coffee, driven by a man she'd known for less than 24 hours, who was already thinking about her daughter, his daughter, as the center of everything that mattered. She thought about Marcus's voice on the phone. Very convenient timing. She thought about Judge Calloway looking at them. Whatever he'd seen. She thought about a ring on her finger that was simple and gold and weighed exactly as much as a real thing weighs. Liam, she said. Yeah. Thank you. She paused. I know that's not enough, but I mean it. He drove for a moment without answering. Then, don't thank me yet, he said. We've got 14 months. I know. A lot can happen in 14 months. She looked at her ring. I know, she said again. And for the first time since Eleanor had died, for the first time in 8 months of legal maneuvering and careful strategy, and being absolutely in control of every variable, Victoria Hale did not know what came next. And somehow, sitting in that truck, moving toward a life she hadn't planned, that felt less like falling, and more like finally standing on solid ground. Sophie saw the ring first. She didn't say anything right away. That was the thing about Sophie she processed before she spoke, which was a trait that made her simultaneously the easiest and most unnerving child Liam had ever encountered, and he had encountered exactly one child, but still. They picked her up at 3:15. Liam pulling to the curb, while Sophie came down the school steps with her backpack listing to one side and her shoelace on the left foot coming undone, and she climbed into the back seat and said, "Hi, Dad." And then she saw Victoria in the passenger seat and she said, "Oh, you came back." Not surprised, just confirming a data point, and then her eyes dropped to Victoria's left hand on the door rest and she went very still. 3 seconds of silence. "That's a ring," Sophie said. "It is," Victoria said. "A wedding ring." "Yes." Sophie looked at her father. Liam met her eyes in the rearview mirror and gave her the look that meant, "We'll talk. I'll explain everything, I promise." Sophie had learned to read that look at age 5. She accepted it now with a small nod and then looked back out the window and said, "Gerald was on the fence this morning. That means he's thinking about something. He does that when the weather's about to change." Nobody said anything about the ring again for the rest of the drive. But when they got home, and Victoria moved toward the kitchen table, Sophie appeared at her elbow and said quietly, so only Victoria could hear, "That's Mom's chair. The one at the end. Dad doesn't sit in it either." She pointed to the chair on the left. "That one's free." Victoria looked at the chair, then at Sophie. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Sophie nodded once. "Dad was going to tell you. I just didn't want it to be awkward." Then she went to put her backpack away, and Victoria stood in the kitchen of a house she'd been in twice in her life. A ring on her finger being guided through the geography of someone else's grief by a 7-year-old. And she felt something crack open in her chest that she wasn't ready for. She sat in the left chair. She did not look at the one at the end. "Dear," Liam explained it to Sophie that evening. The real version shaped for a child, not dumbed down because Sophie was not a child who tolerated being talked down to, but translated. He told her that Victoria had a problem, that the problem involved her grandmother's work, and some people who wanted to take it away, and that he'd agreed to help by being her husband for a while, legally officially, and that Victoria was going to live with them during that time because it needed to look real. "Because it is real," Sophie said. Liam paused. "What do you mean?" "You're actually married," Sophie said. "That's real. It's not fake married. There's no such thing as fake married. Judge Calloway did it." She looked at him. "Mrs. Patterson at school says Judge Calloway did her parents' wedding, and he's very official." "How do you know Judge Calloway did it?" "I heard you on the phone this morning telling Grandpa." She tilted her head. "Is Grandpa upset?" Liam exhaled. "Grandpa is processing." "Did he do the voice cool?" "What voice?" Sophie dropped her register 3 octaves. "Liam Michael Carter, what in the Sam Hill? Go to bed, Sophie." She grinned, the first real grin of the day, the one that still made Liam's heart do something complicated, and disappeared down the hall, and he heard her pause outside the guest room, where Victoria was on a call, and then her footsteps continued, and a moment later, the sound of a door closing, and a 7-year-old settling in for the night. He sat at the kitchen table and called his father back. The conversation lasted 22 minutes, and was as predicted, not easy. His father was not a man who adjusted quickly to information. He was a man who had watched his son bury his wife and raise his granddaughter alone and work himself to the bone in that workshop, and never once complain. And the idea of Liam Carter agreeing to a legal marriage arrangement with a woman he'd met the day before was his father's word lunacy. "She's a good person, Dad," Liam said. "You've known her for 20 hours. "I've known her for 20 hours, he agreed. "And in those 20 hours, she told me the truth when she didn't have to hurt me, when it cost her something and made Sophie feel like her words mattered. That's not nothing." A long pause on the line. Then his father quieter. "And the money goes into a trust. Sophie's education, I'm not touching it beyond that." Another pause. "You've already thought about all of it." "I thought about it between 4 and 6 this morning." His father made a sound, the sound of a man who recognized his son in a statement and didn't know whether to be proud or worried. "You're too much like your mother," he said finally. "She made decisions with her whole chest, too." It wasn't approval. But it wasn't opposition either. It was enough. Victoria came off her call at 9:47. She found Liam in the workshop. He went there when he needed to think. And she was starting to understand that about him, the way the work settled him, the way his hands knew what to do, even when his mind was loud. "The board meeting got moved," she said from the doorway. Marcus pushed it up. "It's now Thursday. That's 6 days." Liam kept working. "Okay. 6 days isn't much time to establish... To establish what?" He set down his tool, turned to face her. "That we're real. That we're credible," she said. "Victoria, He said her name the way you say a word to stop someone from running. What does credible look like to you right now? She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Documentation, shared living evidence, photographs if necessary, a coherent... I'm going to stop you there, he said, not unkindly, firmly. Because if you walk into that board meeting with a folder of staged photographs and a rehearsed timeline, Marcus is going to dismantle it in 10 minutes. He knows you. He knows how you operate when you're managing a narrative. He paused. What he doesn't know is how to read a woman who isn't managing anything, who's just living. She stared at him. You want me to just live here for 6 days and trust that it shows. I want you to actually live here for 6 days, he said. There's a difference. That's the same thing. No, it's not. One is a strategy. One is a choice. He picked his tool back up. Go to bed, Victoria. You've been awake since before 4. Tomorrow Sophie has school at 7:50, and she needs someone to quiz her on her multiplication tables at breakfast because I have an early delivery. 6s and 7s. She's got a test Friday. She blinked. You want me to quiz her on multiplication tables? I want you to show up, he said. That's all it ever is. She stood there for a moment, in the doorway of a workshop that smelled like cedar and linseed oil, in a house that was not hers. Wearing a ring she'd chosen herself from a jewelry store that morning, a simple gold band that had cost her $47, which was the cheapest thing she'd purchased in approximately a decade. 6s and 7s, she said. She gets stuck on 42, he said. 6 times 7. Tell her to think of it as a clock. 6 and 7 are neighbors on a clock face, and between them is the 42 minutes past. She absorbed this, filed it. Okay, she said. Good night, he said. She went inside. The multiplication tables worked. Sophie looked up from her cereal when Victoria sat down with the flashcard app on her phone and said, Your dad says you're stuck on 42. And Sophie's eyes narrowed slightly the way they did when she was deciding whether to be defensive. And then she seemed to decide Victoria was being straight with her and said, It just doesn't feel right. 6 times 7 should be 38. I don't know why. Clock trick, Victoria said, and explained it. Sophie tried it 3 times. Her face shifted that specific shift of a child, when something clicks, when the world reorganizes itself around new information and suddenly makes more sense than it did before. That's actually good, Sophie said. It sounded slightly reluctant, like a compliment she'd decided to give honestly rather than easily. Your dad told me, Victoria said. He knows a lot of tricks, Sophie said. He says you can learn most things if you find the right angle. He's right about that. Sophie looked at her over the cereal bowl. Do you know a lot of tricks? Different kinds, Victoria said. Business things, legal things, ways to read a room. Can you teach me one? Victoria considered. When you walk into a room and you want people to take you seriously, she said, walk like you already belong there. Not fast, not slow, like you've already decided the room is yours. Sophie sat up slightly straighter. Like this. Exactly like that. Sophie tried it across the kitchen, stood up, walked from the table to the counter, and back with the precise intentional gravity of a child who has been given a tool and intends to use it. Did it work? She asked. You walked like you owned the building, Victoria said. Sophie sat back down satisfied, ate her cereal, and then without looking up, Dad walks like that in the workshop. He says you have to own the space before the wood will cooperate. Victoria did not say anything for a moment. Then, he's a good teacher. He's the best, Sophie said, simply, as a fact of the universe. 6 times 7 is 42, she added, testing it. Clock trick. Clock trick, Victoria confirmed. The first real crisis came on Wednesday. Not Marcus, not the board. It came from a magazine, one of the ones with a glossy cover and a long reach, and a writer who'd spent 48 hours running down every available angle on Victoria Hale's surprise courthouse marriage. The headline read, CEO's Mystery Marriage Love Story, or Legal Lifeline. The article was not kind. It was not inaccurate either, which made it worse. It laid out the timeline: Eleanor Hale's death, the contested will, Victoria's previous failed engagements, and then 3 paragraphs that hit like cold water. A profile of Liam Carter that included quotes from 2 people in town who hadn't been asked to keep anything private because nobody had warned them they needed to. The hardware store owner said, "Liam's a good man. Quiet. Keeps to himself since his wife passed. Honestly, I was surprised I didn't know he was seeing anyone." The woman who ran the Methodist church office said, "He's devoted to that little girl. I hope whoever he married understands what she's getting. He's not a man who does anything halfway." Neither quote was hostile. Both of them landed like grenades in the hands of a writer looking for texture, because what they communicated together was this came out of nowhere. And out of nowhere was exactly the story Marcus needed. Victoria read the article at 6:50 a.m., standing in the kitchen while the coffee brewed. Liam read it over her shoulder. Neither of them spoke while they were reading. Then Liam said, "Bill at the hardware store didn't know we needed to be on the same page." "No," Victoria said. "That's on me. I should have—" He stopped, recalibrated. "I should have talked to people I trust before this went public." "I should have anticipated it," she said. "Media containment is my area. I dropped it." We both dropped it. He poured 2 cups of coffee, handed her one. "What does your communications team say?" "I have 3 missed calls from my PR director," she said. "She wants me to issue a statement." "What kind of statement?" "The kind that confirms we're genuinely together." She held the coffee with both hands. "She wants personal details. Something that sounds real." "Something that sounds real," he said. "You know what I mean." "I know what you mean," he said. "I'm just pointing out that there's a version of this where we give her real details, actual true things, and they land better than anything manufactured." Victoria looked at him. "Like what?" "Like the fact that my grandfather worked with your grandmother's foundation," he said. "That's not a planted story. That's documented history. That's how you found me. That's a real thread, a connection that existed before any of this." He picked up his coffee. "Or the clock trick." She blinked. "The multiplication tables. You helped Sophie study this morning. That happened. That's real. You don't have to manufacture warmth if warmth is actually present." He held her gaze. "Is it present?" She didn't look away. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." "Then tell your PR director that," he said. "Real details. Real story. Start with the grandfather. Let the rest grow from there." She stared at him for a moment. This man in his kitchen at 6:50 in the morning, coffee in hand, thinking more clearly about her public narrative than her own communications team, and felt the disorienting sensation again of solid ground where she'd expected nothing. She called her PR director, told her the grandfather story, the foundation connection, the fact that Liam's knowledge of Eleanor Hale's actual mission had moved her in a conversation she hadn't expected to feel anything during. The PR director listened and then said very quietly, "Victoria, is this real?" "Yes," Victoria said. "Actually real." A pause. "More than I planned for," she said. "And I don't know what to do with that yet. But yes." Her PR director exhaled. "Okay. I can work with actually real. That's the best thing you could have said." Thursday came. The board meeting was in a glass tower in Atlanta, 45 minutes from Savannah, and Victoria had been to this room 63 times and never once felt like she might not walk out of it with what she needed. She felt it now. Liam drove her. She hadn't asked him to. He'd said the night before, "I'll drive you Thursday." Not offered. Said. Like it was already decided. She'd started to protest habit independence, the deep-grooved pattern of a woman who handled everything herself, and he'd looked at her with that patient, non-negotiable expression, and she'd said, "Okay," and that had been the end of it. In the car, 40 minutes of mostly silence, and then Liam said, "Tell me who's in the room." She told him, 7 board members. Two of them were Eleanor's original appointments, old guard loyal to the mission, likely in her corner. Three were newer appointed during a period of expansion, more corporate in their orientation, harder to read. One was Marcus's direct ally, a man named Dalton, who smiled like someone practicing in a mirror, and Marcus himself. "Which two are Eleanor's?" Liam asked. "Ruth Abernathy and James Whitfield," she said. "Ruth's 81. She's been with the Foundation since the beginning. James was Eleanor's attorney for 30 years. "They'll be watching you," he said. "Not the paperwork. You. The way you carry yourself. The way you talk about Eleanor." He paused. "Tell them something true about her. Something small. Something Marcus wouldn't know to manufacture," she thought. "She kept a jar of sand dollars on her desk," she said. "From a beach in South Carolina, where she went with my grandfather on their first trip together. She never moved it, even after he died, even when the office was renovated and everything else changed." "That," Liam said. "That's what you lead with." Victoria looked at him. "That's not a legal argument." "No," he said. "It's better than one." They pulled up to the building. He stopped the car, turned to look at her fully. "You know what you're doing in there?" he said. "You've known this Foundation longer than any of them. You know what Eleanor believed. You know why it matters. Walk in like you already belong there." He paused. "Clock trick." She almost laughed. Almost. "Clock trick," she said. She got out. He didn't drive away. She didn't look back to check, but she knew the way you know certain things in your bones without evidence that he was still there. She walked into the building like she owned it. Because she did. Marcus was already in the room. He was standing near the window when she walked in, coffee in hand, the posture of a man who has been arranging furniture in his mind for a long time and believes the room is already his. He looked at her when she entered, and his expression did something complicated, surprise, layered under contempt. Layered under something she realized after a moment was genuine uncertainty. He hadn't expected her to look like this. Settled. Clear. "Victoria," he said. "Marcus," she said. Ruth Abernathy, 81 years old with white hair and eyes like a woman who has outlasted every storm she's walked into, looked up from her folder. She looked at Victoria for a long moment. Then she said, "Sit down, dear. Let's get this done." Victoria sat. She looked around the room, Dalton with his practiced smile, James Whitfield with his careful neutrality, the three newer members arranged like question marks. She put her hands flat on the table. Breathed. "Before we go to procedure," she said, "I want to tell you something about my grandmother." She paused. She kept a jar of sand dollars on her desk, from a beach in South Carolina. Her first trip with my grandfather. She never moved it, not through renovations, not through loss, not through 40 years of this foundation changing and growing and becoming something none of us fully predicted. She paused again. She kept it because she believed that the things you build should be rooted in something real. Not in paperwork, not in legal clauses. In people. In love. In the work of showing up. The room was very quiet. Ruth Abernathy's eyes were bright with something that wasn't sadness. Marcus set down his coffee cup. The sound was too loud in the silence. "That's very moving," he said. "But this is a governance meeting, not a eulogy. The clause requires—" "The clause is satisfied," James Whitfield said. His voice was dry and precise. The voice of a man who has read every word of every document in this room more than once. He slid a copy of the marriage certificate across the table. "Filed this morning with the county clerk's office. Legal witnessed, properly executed." Marcus looked at the document. His jaw worked. "I'll be contesting the circumstances," he said. "On what grounds?" Whitfield said. "On the grounds that this marriage is—" He stopped, seemed to weigh his words. "Convenient." "Convenience is not a legal standard, Marcus," Whitfield said. "Authenticity is," Marcus said. He looked directly at Victoria. "I'm going to spend the next 14 months proving this is a fabrication. I have resources. I have time. And I have a very good memory of how many times in the last 8 months you've tried to manage a situation that you couldn't actually control." The room held its breath. Victoria looked at her cousin. She thought about Liam in the parking garage, still there, not driving away. She thought about Sophie setting 3 plates without being asked. She thought about a clock trick and 42 and sand dollars on a desk. "Go ahead," she said. Calm. Absolute. "Spend the next 14 months watching us. Send your people. Review every document. Interview every neighbor." She held his gaze. "What you'll find is a man who shows up every day without being asked, without performance, without strategy." She paused. "You've spent your whole life in rooms like this one, Marcus. You know how to read the manufactured version of everything. But I don't think you know what the real thing looks like anymore. I think you've forgotten." Something moved across his face. She couldn't name it. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't rage. It was something older and stranger, the expression of a man who has been told a true thing he didn't want to hear and knows it. Ruth Abernathy cleared her throat. "I move to confirm Victoria Hale as director of the foundation in full satisfaction of the will's conditions," she said. "Do I have a second?" "Seconded," James Whitfield said without hesitation. The vote was 5-2. Dalton and Marcus against, everyone else for. It was done. Victoria sat in the room while people gathered their things, and she did not perform relief. She did not perform victory, because what she felt was neither of those things. What she felt was the specific, quiet, profound sensation of a woman standing on ground she'd fought for, and realizing that the ground itself had changed while she was fighting, that it was more solid than she'd planned for, that it was rooted in something she hadn't expected to find here. She went outside. Liam was leaning against the truck. She walked across the parking lot and stopped in front of him, and for a moment just looked at him. This man she'd known for 6 days. This man who had driven her here and waited and not gone anywhere. "Well," he said. 5-2, she said. He nodded once. "You okay?" She considered lying. She considered performing fine, performing victory, performing the composed CEO who has just secured her legal position and is ready to move to the next item on the agenda. Instead, she said, "Marcus said he's going to spend 14 months proving we're not real." "I know," Liam said. "That doesn't worry you." He pushed off the truck, opened the passenger door. "Get in," he said. "Sophie's got her multiplication test at 1:30, and she's going to want to tell us how it went." She stood there. "Liam?" "Victoria." "That doesn't worry you," she said again. 14 months of scrutiny, everything examined. He looked at her steadily. "Only if there's nothing real to find," he said. "Is there?" She thought about 6 days. About pasta and Gerald and sand dollars and clock tricks. About a ring that cost $47 and weighed more than anything she'd ever purchased. About a man who drove her to a board meeting and waited in the parking lot without being asked because that was simply what he did. He showed up. "Yes," she said. "There is." "Then we've got nothing to worry about," he said. "Come on, let's go hear about the test." She got in the truck. He closed the door. And for the 3rd time in 6 days, Victoria Hale felt solid ground beneath her. Not because she'd secured it, not because she'd managed it, but because someone had simply quietly chosen to stand on it beside her. She looked out the window as they pulled into traffic. 14 months, she thought. And for the first time, that didn't sound like a sentence. It sounded like time. Sophie got a 94 on her multiplication test. She announced it the way she announced most things, directly, without preamble, climbing into the back seat and holding the paper out like evidence in a case she'd already won. There was a small star sticker in the corner that her teacher had applied gold slightly crooked, and Sophie had examined it for approximately half a second before deciding it was satisfactory. 6 times 7, Victoria said. 42, Sophie said. Clock trick. She paused. I also taught it to Marisol, and she got it right on the practice quiz, so I think it should be a permanent school strategy. You taught it to your friend? Liam said. I taught it to 4 people, Sophie said. Marisol Devon, the kid whose name I keep forgetting who sits by the window in Mrs. Patterson. You taught your teacher, Victoria said. She was stuck on it too, Sophie said simply. 42 is tricky for everyone. Liam caught Victoria's eye in the rearview mirror. Something passed between them. Not planned, not managed. Just the particular warmth of two people sharing a moment involving a child. They both in their different ways had decided mattered. Victoria looked away first. But she was smiling when she did it. 3 weeks passed, not quietly. Nothing with Marcus Hale. In the picture passed quietly, but they passed, and the rhythm of passing time began to build its own kind of structure. The mornings had a shape. The evenings had a shape. Even the unexpected things, the days when Liam's delivery truck had a flat on the highway, the evening Sophie's school project on Georgia history somehow became a 2-hour kitchen table collaboration that ended with glue on Victoria's blazer and a genuinely impressive replica of Fort Pulaski. Even those began to feel less like disruptions and more like the texture of a life being lived rather than managed. Victoria had not lived anywhere in years. She had stayed in places, hotel rooms, her apartment in Atlanta that she visited between trips, guest houses at conference centers, but living the actual daily accumulation of small choices in a shared space was something she had not done since her grandmother's house when she was young enough that she hadn't known to pay attention to it. She paid attention now. She noticed that Liam made coffee at 5:47 every morning, and it was always too strong, and he drank it anyway. She noticed that Sophie moved through the house in a specific pattern. Kitchen first, then bathroom, then the chair by the front window, where she'd sit for exactly 5 minutes before school looking outside, not doing anything, just looking, and that Liam never interrupted those 5 minutes, even when they were running late. She noticed that the workshop went quiet at 9 p.m. Always, because that was when Liam came in and checked on Sophie, and then sat in the kitchen and read for an hour before bed, and that he read actual books, paper ones dog-eared and cracked along the spine. She noticed that she'd stopped checking her phone during dinner. She noticed that last, and Marcus's first investigator arrived on a Tuesday. She didn't know he was an investigator. At first he introduced himself at the hardware store as a journalist doing a feature on small Savannah businesses, and Bill, who was decent and trusting, and had known Liam for years, talked to him for 20 minutes about Liam's craftsmanship and his reputation and the kind of man he was. And it was only when the same man appeared at Sophie's school the next morning, asking the front office about enrollment and community involvement, and trying to get eyes on the pickup routine, that the school called Liam. Because they had his number as primary contact, and because Mrs. Patterson had very specific feelings about strange adults asking questions near her students. Liam called Victoria from the school parking lot at 8:19 a.m. Marcus sent someone, he said. He tried to get near Sophie's school. The temperature in Victoria's voice dropped 10 degrees in 1 second. Is she okay? She's fine. She's in class. The school handled it. A pause. I need you to understand this crossed a line. Whatever the professional arrangement is, whatever Marcus thinks he's doing, my daughter doesn't get used as a research point. I know, Victoria said. Victoria. I know, she said. And there was something in it, not just the legal awareness, but genuine anger, the kind that rises from a place you didn't know was that tender until someone touched it. I'm calling James Whitfield in the next 5 minutes. Marcus just violated the terms of his own legal challenge by approaching a minor connected to the principals. That's not an investigation, that's harassment, and it gives us grounds to— I don't care about grounds right now, Liam said. I care about Sophie. I need to know this won't happen again. It won't, she said. I will make absolutely certain it won't. How? Because I'm going to make Marcus understand what happens when he stops playing legal chess and starts touching things that are actually mine to protect. The word mine landed differently than she expected, differently than she'd expected to say it, and she heard Liam go quiet on the other end, and she did not take it back. Silence for 3 seconds. Okay, he said quietly. Go back to work, she said. I've got this. He went back to work. She made 4 phone calls in 30 minutes, and by noon, Marcus had received a formal legal notice from James Whitfield's office, informing him that any further contact with individuals connected to the Hale Carter household, particularly minors, would result in immediate injunctive action, and a motion to dismiss his will, contest on grounds of witness intimidation. Marcus did not send another investigator, but he wasn't finished. The article came out on a Thursday morning, and it was not from the First magazine. This one was smaller, meaner, more surgical. It had photographs, long lens, taken from a distance of Liam coming out of a building in downtown Savannah that Victoria didn't recognize. The caption implied a meeting with a woman who was not Victoria. The text was careful in the way that malicious things are. Careful, it didn't state anything directly. It only raised questions with the specific architecture of a story designed to make readers fill in the blanks with the worst available conclusion. Victoria saw it at 6 a.m. She read it twice. She put her phone face down on the kitchen table and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the wood, the way she'd sat at the board table, the way she did when she needed to think before she reacted. Then she picked the phone back up and texted Liam. "There's an article. You need to see it before Sophie does. Come in when you can." He came in from the workshop 4 minutes later, still carrying the coffee he'd made at 5:47. She handed him her phone. He read it. She watched his face not for guilt, not to assess whether the implication had any truth, but because she'd learned in 3 weeks that Liam Carter's face told you the real story if you knew how to read it, and what she needed to know right now was whether he was surprised or whether he was calculating. He was surprised. Genuinely, quietly, specifically surprised, the expression of a man who has walked into a room he didn't know existed. "That building," he said. "That's my accountant's office. I was there to set up Sophie's education trust. With the..." He stopped. Looked at her. "With the first installment of the money you gave me." She nodded, said nothing. "The woman in the photo," he said. "That's Renee Callahan. She's been my accountant for 6 years. She's also 63, and she's Tom Callahan's wife. Tom built the bookcases in the Methodist church lobby. I've known that family for a decade." "I know," Victoria said. He looked at her. "You knew before you showed me the article. I had my team verify the building address and cross-reference the woman's appearance with your known professional contacts before I came to get you," she said. "Yes." Something moved across his face, not offense. Something more complicated than that, the specific expression of a man who has been verified by someone and doesn't know whether to find it reassuring or unsettling. "You investigated me," he said. "I protected us," she said. "There's a difference." He held her gaze. Then slowly the corner of his mouth shifted, not a smile exactly, something quieter. "You're getting better at that," he said. "At what?" "Knowing the difference between the two." She felt the warmth of that land somewhere she wasn't entirely prepared for. She picked her phone back up. "I'm issuing a correction through my PR team with full documentation of what that building is and who that woman is. Verifiable, public. Done by 9 a.m. "Okay," he said. "Marcus is running out of moves," she said. "He's escalating because he's losing. That means the next thing he tries will be bigger." "What's the biggest thing he has?" Liam asked. She was quiet for a moment. "The prenuptial agreement," she said. "Or the lack of one. He's going to argue that no financially sophisticated woman would marry without one unless the marriage was too rushed to be legitimate." "Is that true? That I didn't get a prenuptial agreement?" She paused. "Yes, we went to the courthouse in 13 hours. There was no time." "But you gave me a legal contract before the marriage," he said. "Which I'll argue was its functional equivalent," she said. "But Marcus will say that a prearranged payment contract proves the marriage was commercial rather than genuine." She exhaled. "He's not wrong that it looks complicated." Liam set down his coffee. "Then we uncomplicate it," he said. "How?" "We restructure it," he said. "Call James Whitfield. The $2 million we agreed on, I want to restructure it as a foundation grant. For the restoration work. Specific projects. I put in the labor, the foundation covers the materials. Everything goes back into the work. He held her gaze. That way there's no personal payment. No commercial transaction. Just a husband who wanted to contribute to something his grandfather believed in. She stared at him. You'd give up the $2 million, she said. Sophie's trust is already funded with the first installment, he said. She doesn't need more than that, and I don't need Marcus's lawyers turning $2 million into the story. He paused. The foundation needs restoration work. I'm good at restoration work. That's not complicated. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. This man who had just voluntarily walked away from more money than most people saw in a decade, because it was the right shape for the thing they were trying to build, and felt something shift in her chest that had been shifting incrementally for 3 weeks, and was now moving with serious intention. You're doing it again, she said. Doing what? Thinking 3 moves ahead when I'm still on the current problem, she said. I learned it from you, he said. She called James Whitfield at 7:15. By noon, the restructuring was filed. It was Sophie who broke the next thing open. Not deliberately. Sophie never operated deliberately in the way adults meant. When they said deliberately, she operated with the relentless directness of someone who had not yet learned to want things sideways. She came home from school on a Friday, 4 weeks into the arrangement, and dropped her backpack in the kitchen and looked at Victoria, who was on her laptop at the table, going through foundation budget reports, and said, "Caitlin Parker said you and Dad got married for money." The laptop stopped mattering. Victoria looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at Victoria with the expression of a child who is bringing an adult a problem she doesn't entirely have the language for yet, and trusting the adult to have better language. "Where did Caitlin Parker hear that?" Victoria said carefully. "Her mom saw it on the internet," Sophie said. "She said it's a—" Sophie paused, working the word. "A convenience marriage." "What do you think?" Victoria said. Sophie considered it the way she considered everything, fully without performance. "I think," she said slowly, "that Caitlin Parker's mom doesn't know what she's talking about. Because you help with homework, and you learned the clock trick, and you got really mad when that man came to my school." She paused. People don't get that mad about things they don't care about. They just don't. Victoria felt the back of her throat tighten. "Sophie." "Also," Sophie said, with the decisive tone of someone filing final evidence, "you sit in the right chair. You always sit in the left chair. You remembered about Mom's chair without anyone having to tell you twice." She picked up her backpack. "That matters," she said. "Caitlin Parker's mom doesn't know about the chairs." She went down the hall. Victoria sat at the kitchen table and did not move for a full minute. When Liam came in at 5:30, she was still at the table, laptop closed. Now, hands around a cup of tea that had gone cold, and he looked at her and knew something had happened the way he always seemed to know. Reading her the way he read wood, looking for the grain. "What happened?" he said. She told him. About Caitlin Parker and her mother, and the word convenience, and Sophie's verdict delivered with the gravity of a child who has cross-examined the available evidence and reached a conclusion she is prepared to defend. Liam was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's right, you know, about people not getting that mad about things they don't care about." "I know," Victoria said. "Are you okay?" She looked at her cold tea. "I've been sitting here for an hour," she said, "trying to figure out when this stopped being something I was managing and became something I was—" She stopped. "Living," he said. She looked up at him. "It's okay," he said. "That's a good thing. That's the whole point." "Is it?" she said. And it wasn't rhetorical. It was real, a woman genuinely asking because the thing she was feeling was large, and she didn't have established protocol for large, unmanaged things. He sat down across from her. Not in Claire's chair, in his own. "Victoria," he said, "what are you actually asking?" She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm asking," she said carefully, whether what I'm feeling is what I think it is, or whether I'm confusing proximity and gratitude and stress, and, "What do you think it is?" he said. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the cold tea, at the left chair where she always sat, at this man who had opened his home and his life and his daughter to her on 13 hours' notice, and had not once, since then, treated her like a transaction. "I think," she said quietly, "that I'm in serious trouble." He held her gaze. Something in his face did something she couldn't fully name, something that recognized her words and didn't flinch from them. "Yeah," he said, softly. "Me too." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the fullest silence Victoria could remember, sitting inside of, full of everything they weren't saying yet, everything that was growing in the space between contract and real, between arrangement and choice. Sophie appeared in the doorway. "Are we having dinner or not?" she said. "Because Gerald has been on the fence all afternoon, and I think that means it's going to rain, and I always want soup when it rains, and I need to know if we have soup." Liam looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Liam. "Do we have soup?" he said. "There's a can of tomato in the second cabinet," she said. "And I know how to make it better." "With what?" "Butter and a little cream and black pepper," she said. "My grandmother's way." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Eleanor's soup." Victoria stared at her. "How do you know about Eleanor?" "Dad told me about the sand dollars," Sophie said. "And I looked her up. She has a Wikipedia page. It mentions the soup. It says she made it for Foundation volunteers." Sophie tilted her head. "Can you actually make it?" "I've made it twice in my life," Victoria said. "But I watched her make it 100 times." "That counts," Sophie said definitively, and went to get the can from the cabinet. Liam looked at Victoria. She was already getting up, already moving toward the stove, already rolling up her sleeve, and there was something in her face that hadn't been there 6 days ago, or 6 weeks ago, when she'd stood in his doorway in silk and heels and desperate precision and said, "I need you to marry me by tomorrow." She looked, he thought, like someone who had found something they didn't know they were looking for. He didn't say it out loud, not yet. Some things needed more time before they could be said without the weight of them breaking something delicate. But he watched her show Sophie how to add butter to tomato soup the way Eleanor had showed her. And Sophie stood on her tiptoes to see into the pot, and outside the first drops of rain hit the window, and Gerald, who had been on the fence all afternoon, apparently anticipating exactly this, was presumably somewhere dry. Marcus had 4 more months to find something that wasn't there. He was welcome to try. What he would find, Liam thought, was exactly what was in this kitchen, a woman learning to make soup the way her grandmother made it, a child on her tiptoes, rain on the window, and a man who had stopped calling this an arrangement sometime around day 4 and hadn't found a reason to go back. Let Marcus look. The truth was the easiest thing in the world to defend, because the truth, it turned out, was this. Marcus made his final move on a Wednesday. Not through lawyers this time. Not through investigators or planted articles or carefully worded insinuations in publications that specialized in carefully worded insinuations. He made it the way people make moves when they're out of professional options and have decided that personal damage is the only remaining currency. He called Liam directly. Liam was in the workshop when the phone rang, unknown number, which he almost didn't answer, and then did because Sophie had a field trip that day, and unknown numbers on field trip days got answered. "Mr. Carter," Marcus said, "I think it's time we spoke without my cousin in the room." Liam set down his tool. "How did you get this number?" "I'm thorough," Marcus said. "You know that about me by now." "What do you want, Marcus?" Not a question. A door held open the minimum possible width. "I want to offer you something," Marcus said. $5 million, wired directly to any account you choose today before end of business, in exchange for a signed affidavit confirming that the marriage was entered into as a commercial arrangement with no genuine romantic or familial intent. A pause. You walk away with $5 million. Your daughter's future is secure beyond anything the foundation grant covers, and Victoria well. Victoria lands where she was always going to land, without Eleanor's conditions propping her up. Liam was quiet for a long moment. Marcus filled the silence the way practiced manipulators do, with what sounds like reasonableness. "I'm not your enemy, Mr. Carter. You're a working man, a father. You made a practical decision when a compelling offer was presented. There's no shame in that. But you have to know this arrangement has an expiration date. When it ends, you go back to your workshop and your daughter and your life, and Victoria goes back to her world, and those two worlds don't actually intersect. Not permanently. Not really. You done?" Liam said. A beat. "I'm offering you $5 million. I heard you," Liam said. "And I want you to hear me. You called me to buy my word against my wife. You used the word practical like it's a compliment, when what you mean is that you think I can be purchased because I work with my hands, and I don't have a board seat." He picked his tool back up. "You're wrong about all of it. Don't call this number again." He hung up. He stood in the workshop for 60 seconds without moving. Then he called Victoria. She answered on the second ring. "Hey. Marcus just offered me $5 million to sign an affidavit saying the marriage was commercial," he said. "I told him no. I'm telling you because you need to know, and because I'm not a person who has conversations about our marriage without you knowing." The silence on her end lasted exactly 4 seconds. "He called you directly," she said. "Yes. On your personal number?" "Yes." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled in the way that means the opposite of calm underneath. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said. "Are you?" "I will be," she said. "In approximately the amount of time it takes James Whitfield to file a motion for sanctions against Marcus for attempting to suborn perjury from a principal in an active legal matter." Her voice went somewhere arctic. "He just handed us everything we need to end this." Victoria. "Yeah. $5 million, he said. "That's what he thinks I'm worth." Liam. "I'm not upset about it," he said. "I just want you to know that I've thought about what my answer would have been at any point in the last 2 months. Every single day of the last 2 months. He paused. It was always no. This time the silence lasted longer. "I know," she said softly. "I've known that for a while." "Okay," he said. "Go call Whitfield. I've got work to finish." Liam. "Yeah. Thank you," she said. "And I don't mean for the legal thing." He understood. "Go make your calls," he said. And he went back to work. James Whitfield filed the sanctions motion by 4 p.m. By 6, Marcus's attorney had called to discuss settlement. By 8, Marcus himself through his counsel, because Marcus was not a man who made personal calls when he was losing, had formally withdrawn the will contest. It was over. Victoria sat at the kitchen table and read the settlement document on her laptop and felt not triumph. She'd expected triumph. What she felt instead was something quieter and more complicated, the feeling of a door closing on a very long hallway, and the sudden awareness that the room you're standing in now is the one that actually matters. Liam made dinner. Sophie talked about the field trip, a museum with a reconstructed colonial kitchen that Sophie had opinions about, specifically regarding the historical accuracy of the butter churn, which she had apparently researched during the bus ride home. Victoria listened and asked questions and ate and did not think about Marcus or the board or 14 months or any of the architecture she'd built her life around for the past year. She thought about butter churns because Sophie was explaining them with complete seriousness, and that deserved complete attention. After dinner, after Sophie was in bed, Liam sat across from her at the table and said, "It's over." "Yes," she said. "The 14 months don't matter anymore," he said. "Legally. The contest is withdrawn. The foundation is secure. You could—" He stopped, chose the next words carefully. "You could dissolve the marriage now if you wanted. Quietly. The legal threat is gone." She looked at him steadily. "Is that what you want?" "I'm asking what you want," he said. Liam. Victoria. "I made Eleanor's soup last week," she said. Sophie asked me to teach her the clock trick for division now, because apparently multiplication was just the beginning. Your father called me last Tuesday to apologize for how the first phone call went and spent 40 minutes telling me stories about you as a child that I am absolutely going to use against you someday. She paused. I sit in the left chair. I remember about Claire's chair every single morning when I come into this kitchen, and I think about the kind of love that makes a chair sacred, and I think about the kind of man who teaches his daughter to honor it. Her voice was even, but her eyes were not. I am not going anywhere. That is not what I want. He looked at her for a long moment. What do you want? He said. Quiet. Serious. The question underneath the question. She held his gaze. I want to stop calling this an arrangement, she said. I want to stop counting months. I want to be here because I chose it, not because a legal document requires it. She paused. I want what's actually in this house. The pasta and the multiplication tables and the workshop going quiet at 9 and the books with broken spines and Sophie's 5 minutes by the window in the morning. She stopped, swallowed. I want you. That's what I want. The room was very quiet. Liam looked at the woman across the table, this woman who had walked into his workshop in silk and heels and desperation and a legally structured offer, and had over the course of 4 months become the most real thing in his daily life. Who had learned to sit in the right chair? Who had driven Marcus's best investigators to a dead end by simply living honestly? Who had made his daughter feel like her words mattered, and his grandfather's legacy feel alive, and his kitchen feel like it had another person in it who was supposed to be there? Okay, he said. She blinked. Okay. I want the same thing, he said. I just needed to know you did. That's it, she said. Just okay. What did you want me to say? Something more. She searched for the word. Expansive. The corner of his mouth moved. You walked into my workshop 4 months ago and proposed marriage with a legal contract and a 48-hour deadline, he said. I think we've both established that we don't need a lot of words to understand each other. She looked at him. Something broke open in her chest in the best possible way. You're insufferable, she said. You're not the first person to say that, he said. Sophie says it too. Sophie says I'm persistently literal, he said. Which she looked up in the dictionary specifically to use correctly. Victoria laughed. A real one. The kind that arrives before you can manage it. The kind that is not performance, but pure release. And it sounded like something that had been waiting a long time to come out. Liam watched her laugh and felt the specific rare happiness of a man who has stopped waiting to feel like himself again. The twist came not from Marcus, it came from Ruth Abernathy. Ruth called Victoria on a Thursday morning 3 days after the settlement, and she didn't call Victoria's office line. She called the house. Liam answered because he was the one in the kitchen at 5:47 when the phone rang, and Ruth said, "Is this Liam Carter?" And when he said yes, she said, "Good. I wanted to speak to you first." He sat down. Ruth Abernathy had been with Eleanor Hale's foundation since the beginning. She had watched it grow from a passion project into a $400 million institution. She had watched Eleanor age and plan and worry and ultimately trust her granddaughter with everything she'd built. And she had watched over 4 months with the attentiveness of 81 years of reading people as Victoria Hale changed. I've known Victoria since she was 9 years old, Ruth said. I've watched her become extraordinary, and I've watched her become efficient. Do you understand what I mean? I think so, Liam said. Eleanor worried about her, Ruth said. Not about her competence, about her rootedness, whether she had people, whether she had a life that was hers, and not just a function of her responsibilities. A pause. Eleanor put that marriage clause in the will on purpose, Liam. Not to control Victoria, to force her to stop long enough to let someone in. Liam was very still. She engineered it. She provided an opportunity, Ruth said carefully. She couldn't know who. She couldn't know how. But she knew Victoria well enough to know that without a deadline, without a genuine, inescapable, non-negotiable deadline, her granddaughter would spend the rest of her life preparing to live instead of living. He absorbed this. Does Victoria know? Victoria knows her grandmother loved her, Ruth said. I'm not sure she's fully understood yet that love sometimes looks like a chess move. A pause. I'm telling you because I think you're the right person to understand it, and because I think you'll know when and how to tell her, or whether to tell her at all. Why do you trust me with that? He said. Because, Ruth said with the directness of a woman who has earned the right to say exactly what she sees. You answered the phone at 5:50 in the morning in your own kitchen, which means you're actually there. And because when I said Eleanor's name, I heard something in your silence that told me you understand what she built and why it mattered. She paused once more. Take care of her, Liam. Not because she needs managing. Because she's finally stopped managing herself long enough to need something real. She hung up. Liam sat at the kitchen table and looked at the coffee he'd made and thought about Eleanor Hale, a woman he'd never met who had kept sand dollars on her desk and made tomato soup with butter and cream, and had apparently loved her granddaughter well enough to build a trap made entirely of love and set it to spring when Victoria had run out of alternatives. He thought you knew, didn't you? He thought thank you. Victoria came into the kitchen at 6:15, hair down the version of herself that only existed before 7 a.m., and that Liam had come to think of as the truest one before the professional architecture went up before the day made its demands. Who called? She said, moving toward the coffee. Ruth Abernathy, he said. She stopped, turned. Ruth called the house. She wanted to talk to me, he said. Victoria's eyes moved across his face, reading him the way she'd learned to, looking for the grain. What did she say? He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Ruth's words. You'll know when and how to tell her. Not yet. Not this morning with her hair down and her coffee unmade. There would be a moment, the right one, and he would know it when it came. She said she's watched you become extraordinary, he said, and that she's glad you're not doing it alone anymore. Victoria held his gaze. She knew he was giving her the shape of the conversation and not all of it, and she was choosing to trust that which was its own kind of transformation. Victoria Hale, who had managed every variable, allowing one to remain in someone else's hands because she trusted those hands. Okay, she said softly. She poured her coffee, sat down at the left chair. He told her about Eleanor the following Sunday. On the porch after dinner, Sophie inside finishing a drawing she'd started at the table. He told her all of it. Ruth's words, the chess move made from love, the deadline that wasn't about control, but about care. Victoria listened without speaking, all the way to the end. Then she sat for a while in the particular silence of someone reorganizing everything they thought they understood. She knew I wouldn't do it on my own, she said finally. She knew you needed permission, he said, or something that worked like it. A deadline, she said. She gave me a deadline because she knew it was the only language I'd stop arguing with. Sounds like she knew you pretty well, he said. Victoria looked at her hands, the ring on her left hand, $47 more weight than anything she'd ever worn. She used to say that love isn't what you feel, it's what you build. Her voice was very steady. I used to think that was about the foundation, the properties, the work. She paused. I think she meant something else. Yeah, Liam said. I think she did. Sophie appeared in the doorway. The drawing is finished, she announced. It's for the hallway. I made an executive decision about the wall space. Did you? Liam said. The hallway needs something between the coat hooks and the bathroom, Sophie said with authority. It's been blank for years. That's not good design. She looked at Victoria. I drew all three of us. Do you want to see it? Victoria stood up. Very much, she said. The drawing went up on the hallway wall on a Sunday evening. Sophie had drawn it in colored pencil, 3 figures, one tall and brown-haired, one in a blue dress that was clearly Victoria, one small with her arms wide. Below it, In careful 7-year-old handwriting, "Our family." Liam hung it with a level because he was constitutionally incapable of hanging anything crooked. Victoria held the pencil marks while he measured. Sophie stood back and directed with the authority of someone who has already decided where things belong. When it was straight, all three of them stepped back and looked at it. "It's good," Sophie said. Satisfied. Final. "It's very good," Victoria said. Her voice was entirely steady, which cost her something, and she paid it without complaint. Liam looked at the drawing. 3 figures. One small word family written in the handwriting of a child who had lost one version of this and built another with the materials available the way all the best things get built. He reached over and took Victoria's hand. Not for cameras. Not for Marcus. Not for the board or Ruth Abernathy, or the memory of Eleanor's chess move or 14 months, or any of the architecture that had brought them here. Just because her hand was there and his was there, and it felt like the right thing, which was the only reason anything real ever happens. She held on. Sophie looked at their joined hands, and then looked at the drawing, and appeared to consider whether this development required comment. She decided it did not. It was apparently within expected parameters. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to check on Gerald." And she went with the complete self-possession of a child who has arranged everything to her satisfaction and is now free to attend to other business. The door closed behind her. Liam and Victoria stood in the hallway of his house, their house in front of a drawing that said, "Our family" in careful pencil, and the evening settled around them, the way evenings do when the right people are in the right place. "I walked into your workshop 4 months ago," she said quietly, with a contract and a deadline and the absolute certainty that I had thought of everything. "You had?" he said. "You just hadn't thought of this." She looked at him. "No," she said. "I hadn't thought of this." He turned to face her fully. "Victoria Hale Carter," he said. "I'm in love with you. I've been in love with you since approximately day 11, when you stayed up until midnight helping Sophie with her Georgia history project, and got glue on your blazer and didn't complain once." She stared at him. "Day 11, she said. "You counted." "I'm a precise person," he said. "You told me I was doing it wrong with the papier-mâché." "You were doing it wrong with the papier-mâché, and that's when you fell in love with me." "That's when I knew," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had opened every door he didn't have to open, who had hung a child's drawing with a level, who had turned down $5 million without pausing to consider it, who had driven her to a board meeting and waited in the parking lot and told her the truth at every single step when the truth was the harder thing to say. "I've been in love with you," she said, "since you told me not to use Sophie to close the deal, and then didn't walk me out." She paused. "Day 1. I've been in love with you since day 1. I just needed 4 months to stop managing it." He kissed her. Not for any audience, not for any record, because she was standing in front of him, and they were both finally completely unambiguously choosing the same thing. When they stepped back, Sophie was standing in the doorway again, Gerald the cat apparently having completed his fence deliberations and come inside. "Gerald says it's going to be clear tomorrow," Sophie reported. "Also, I saw that." She pointed between them with the precision of a child who misses nothing. "I'm not going to make a big deal about it. But for the record," she tilted her head, "I called it on day 2. "Day 2, Victoria said. "When you didn't do the face," Sophie said. "I knew then." She turned to go back inside. "Good night." "Good night, Sophie." They said not planned, not coordinated. Together. The door closed again. Victoria looked at Liam. He looked at her. Outside, the night settled in over Savannah, over the workshop and the gravel drive, and the fence where Gerald made his meteorological assessments, over a house where a drawing hung straight in the hallway, and 3 plates were always set for dinner, and the left chair was always taken. 4 months ago, a woman had walked into a carpenter's workshop with a contract and a desperate deadline and a certainty that she had thought of everything. She had been wrong about that. She had been spectacularly, beautifully, permanently wrong. Eleanor Hale had known she would be, had counted on it, had loved her granddaughter well enough to engineer a collision between her granddaughter's most careful plans and the one thing no plan can account for: the right person in the right place, who simply refuses to go away. Liam Carter had not gone away. And Victoria Hale had stopped wanting him to. That was the whole story. That was every word of it. Not the contract, not the courthouse, not the board hearing, or the sanctions motion, or the $5 million offer that meant nothing. The whole story was a woman who finally stopped managing long enough to let something real find her, and a man who had been real all along, waiting with the patience of someone who builds things that last, who had looked at her on day one and seen not the CEO, or the desperation, or the legal architecture, but the person underneath all of it, the one who loved her grandmother's sand dollars, and felt responsible for people she'd put in harm's way, and didn't know how to show up for small things, but wanted to learn. He had seen her, and she had, in the end, been brave enough to be seen. Some things are built. Some things are inherited. And some things, the best things, the ones that last, arrive on your doorstep in silk and sawdust, and a desperate deadline, and turn out to be exactly what you needed, in exactly the form you never could have planned for. That is what real looks like, and it is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything.